Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 6th of December 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio by Robinson. We're also joined today by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. And we're going to say that defence remains an immensely important subject in UK at the moment. As Veterans for Britain said recently, that of course if a nation state loses the ability to control its own military forces, it no longer exists as a nation state. And those words absolutely true. We'll be coming on to that in a moment. But first of all, we need to have a little bit of a refocus on the BBC. So yesterday we pointed out that the BBC had an article, Bamboozled by Brexit, highlighted here in the red circle. And this was an educational film to help members of the public who weren't, well, perhaps quite bright enough to understand Brexit themselves. So the BBC had come up with what appeared to us to be a very childish cartoon. But we are now bamboozled because it appears that the Bamboozled by Brexit has disappeared. It wasn't easily visible on the BBC's website today. I found it by searching the whole of the website for it. I may have missed it, but it doesn't seem to be very high on the viewing or the reading figures. So Bamboozled by Brexit, following a UK column analysis, seems to have disappeared, Mike.
Well, it's interesting because their featured videos tend to stay up for a couple of days.
Yeah, but not this one. This one, which we described as a childish propaganda piece, has disappeared. If you haven't seen our news report from yesterday, then please do, because we did a lot of analysis of this really unpleasant piece of pro-EU propaganda by the BBC. But there is good news. So we say, relax. The BBC is to educate our children in truth. Couldn't get better, really, Mike, could it?
No, indeed. So the BBC is now going to be teaching fact from fiction in schools. They're going to send BBC journalists, including News at 10 journalist Hugh Edwards, into BBC schools. 1,000 of them are going to get the opportunity in the first effort to be told what fake news is. And what the truth is. The BBC is going to be saying what the truth is. So here's one of the lead people. This is Ramal Rajan. He's BBC media editor. We'll have a little look at what he has to say here. He says that social media and Snapchat is a fun and hyper-convenient way to consume the news, but it comes with attendant dangers. One is that you only see what your friends are interested in. Your worldview will become narrow and is more likely to reinforce your prejudice rather than challenge them. So he's worried on that point. He says a second one that is that if for political or commercial reasons someone invents a lie and successfully imposes verisimilitude on it, truth effectively on it, or the appearance of truth, young minds might come to hold false beliefs. To resist them requires knowledge of the actual state of the world, intellectual tools, that is scrutiny to determine truth from falsehood, and courage to call out liars. So these are really impressive words from the BBC. And he does go on. He says this trinity of subjects, when combined, produces news literacy. And it's this, rather than fake news itself, that the BBC's new initiative is aiming to promote. I was a bit puzzled about this because it almost appeared that he'd admitted the BBC had been promoting fake news, Mike. Since they're going into schools, Brian, it's perhaps not surprising then that they have a special page on this on BBC's Newsround programme. Now, for anybody that hasn't grown up in the United Kingdom, BBC Newsround is the BBC's news programme for children, and it was always on during children's television programming in the afternoons as I was growing up. And of course it's on CBBC now. So they have at the top of the screen there, underneath the headline,
there's a video, and I just wanted to have a little discussion about this video because, well, you'll see what we're talking about as we go through here.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It's been one of the most talked about subjects of the year.
Fake news is a big problem. This is what is and isn't news.
Fake news. But what is it, and what does it mean to you?
Fake news is when someone spreads rumours that aren't true.
It's more of like a scam, I think. I think fake news is rumours spread around by people to get attention.
Sometimes it's like so persuasive that like you think that it is real.
If it's serious news, it can get you possibly worrying and thinking about stuff too much.
So already,
Fake news.
that's the wrong graphic. The first thing they've done there is, first of all, reinforce it's all about fake news, but then we've had some discussion with some pupils about what fake news is. Well, they may be thinking too much about what's going on in the world if they're presented with lots of fake news. It's already some kind of psychological attack on children, basically seems to be the message here. But remember, this is a report which is for children themselves.
A thing that comes out for me in that film clip, Mike, is that, of course, the interviews are only with children. Parents are not involved in this. Parents are not asked what they think about what the material their children may be able to access. Isn't it interesting, though, the little girl at the end actually says that if you get the real news, some of it can be quite scary. So even young children are astute enough to work out that actually when they're getting what they think is the real news, that can be pretty scary. But BBC video targeted at the minds of children, using them as propaganda effectively.
So let's go.
Fake news usually comes down to two things. Firstly, false news stories that aren't true at all.
So false news stories that aren't true at all, Brian. And as we can see there, let's look at what they're saying are false news stories. We've got on the left amazing images of real UFO sighting. This is what's being described as fake news. Well, if we look at the BBC website over the years, what have we got? Well, here's a headline: UFO sightings and other insights into 1960s Valley's life. Rendlesham Forest UFO sighting, new evidence claim. The day UFOs stopped play. Broadhaven UFO sightings marked 40 years on. So the BBC doesn't seem to be too worried about covering UFO subjects. Does that mean that that's fake news? Is that by their definition they've been peddling fake news?
Mike, the BBC doesn't have any definitions. It will shift its definitions to
suit itself.
Suit itself, whatever the latest propaganda is.
Of course, it's not just the BBC, and probably the Daily Express is the worst for this. Alien bombshell, US Navy filmed UFO that defied physics. UFO spotted flying over Yellowstone volcano. Watch astonishing moment, UFO scatters clouds. UFO shock as alien flying saucer snapped hovering over Great Wall of China. Alien proof, object seen in the sky that's physically impossible for mankind to build. Secret space program, is this proof that US TR-3B UFO built with alien technology? And so it goes on. It is just impossible to get away from this stuff, but there's no criticism, apparently, within this of the mainstream media, because, well, I'm actually
lost for words
as to what the point
because
they're
the
actually
hypocrisy of the BBC here is so breathtaking.
Absolutely.
So breathtaking.
Absolutely. So let's move on.
So do you think you'd be able to spot it? Well, these kids here are taking part in a project looking at how much kids like you know about fake news and how they deal with it. It's part of a project that's been running all year. The expert in charge of it thinks that from the age of 10, kids should be taught more about how to spot fake news.
Children know that fake news exists, but do they actually recognise it when they see it online, on the TV and in the newspapers? That's where lessons would really help, because if children stop thinking and feeling that they can actually believe the news is true, then they might start switching off altogether and actually not show an interest in the world around them.
So that's an expert, Brian, but the expert is not named. There's no description of where the expert has come from. It's just an expert. So I contacted BBC Newsround earlier to find out who this expert is. Here she is. And it's a lady called Beth Hewitt. and she is Director of Conversion at Media City UK. Now, we'll come on to Media City UK in a second, but what else does she do? She's a Senior Lecturer in Media Practice at the University of Salford. She's worked across a range of postgraduate and undergraduate creative media programs. She has program-led the Master MA in Documentary Production and an MA in Wildlife Documentary Production. She went on to create and develop the MA in Children's Digital Media Production, which apparently is the only one in the UK. So a great academic, or is she? Because actually, as you read down her CV, you discover that while she is a Senior Lecturer in Media Practice at the University of Salford, her background is all within the BBC and ITV.
What a coincidence.
So she is a BBC person who happened to go off and get a master's degree and is now teaching children in how to identify fake news. But getting back to this business of being Director of Conversion at Media City UK. Media City UK is apparently a joint venture between Peel Land and Property Group and Legal and General Capital. And their vision for Media City UK is to become a leading international hub for the creative and digital sectors and a vibrant destination to work, live and play. Well, how do we look around for Media City UK as you do? Oh look, in fact, when you look a bit closer, you find that Media City UK absolutely supported by the Commonwealth and by CSC leaders in common purpose. And so the question then has to be asked, Brian, who is pushing this policy?
Well, we can have a look at some of the answers to that very easily. I was going to say this is just remarkable. Yesterday, I thought we'd covered some of the worst stuff that the BBC has ever done, but their video yesterday, Bamboozled by Brexit, was targeted at adult minds. But here are the BBC inside schools, not even declaring their own credentials because they have one of their own people helping to create this news for the BBC to report. But policy, we better get to demos. We've mentioned common purpose, and of course common purpose at one stage in close proximity as far as offices were concerned with demos. And let's remember that demos has consistently been interested in the minds of children. We reported this several years ago, Truth, Lies and the Internet. This was all about how demos was working to see how young minds were being influenced by information they could freely access on the internet. And demos said, well, really, we need to be there to help control what children learn. Now let's remember that Demos was formed by former Marxism Today editor Martin Jacks and Jeff Mulgan. And of course, Jeff Mulgan, one of the key common purpose advisory people to Blair. So what are they really saying? Demos is I'm going to say the Marxist organisation that should frame what's in your children's minds. So this is one of their reports, Truth, Lies and the Internet, a report into young people's digital fluency. This is one of their researchers, Jamie Bartlett, for the analysis of social media. And what's he saying? There's an equal measure of mistakes, half-truth, propaganda, misinformation and general nonsense. Knowing how to discriminate between them is both difficult and extremely important. We, Demos, are going to get into the schools and teach your children what they should know. This was one of his tweets that he's written a new report, working along Ipsos Mori. So you work with a company that is taking public opinion.
Yes.
And you're forming public opinion. That's an interesting little relationship there.
Absolutely.
We're bringing this one because, of course, we don't have to go far when we find that this policy actually comes straight out of the UN, UNESCO, rethinking education. This means moving beyond literacy and numeracy to focus on learning environments and on new approaches to learning for greater justice, social equality and global solidarity. Education must be about learning to live on a planet under pressure. It must be about cultural literacy on the basis of respect. On it goes. This is where the policy comes from. The BBC never, ever does any investigation into that type of material.
The Demos going into the schools clearly didn't have quite the effect, so now the BBC needs to take over and do it themselves. So I just end this little section off. I wonder what effect this is actually having, because remember what they were talking about, there was a programme that they were showing on screen that has been running all year with this so-called expert. So let's have a look and see what the effect actually was at the end of the day.
I think fake news should be taught in school because then they can be more aware of what's around them and whether they know if it's fake or not and what to believe. If you weren't taught about it, you would not know what's truth. The best advice that I've learned is like look out for proper brands.
So if you...
Wow.
Right?
Well, I've got to say, I hadn't heard that little bit before. Wow.
Right? So if you're not taught about it in school, you won't know what the truth is.
Yeah.
And the only people to trust are the proper brands.
So the BBC's in selling itself as the BBC, as the trustworthy purveyor of news. David, we're going to give you some comment in a minute. Let's just add a little bit more to this. I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say, because of course this is absolutely new to you, what we're talking about. So let's have a look at the BBC's track record. This is Radio 4, a lady called Nicola Stambridge. She was going to assist the UK column to investigate the abuse of children at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. This was after this very brave Asian gentleman in the bottom right started to blow the whistle on the abuse of white children. Nicola Stambridge told me on the phone she was pulled off the case by her editor, but in any case they'd spoken to the local authority, who said, well, we haven't done anything wrong. So that was the end of the BBC's investigation. We've also had Jimmy Savile, BBC Scotland, refusing to investigate the Holly Gregg case. This one, I think people might remember, a lot of the child abuse charities got very upset at the paedophile statue outside the BBC itself. That statue was never removed because the BBC quite likes it there.
You know, they support Eric Gill, who was a paedophile himself, who created this monstrosity.
Yeah. And what else is the BBC up to? Well, they were faking wildlife shots. Here's the veteran cameraman claiming species smaller than rabbits are filmed on custom-built sets and then sold to children as real news. We got the BBC making a documentary more sensational by getting youths to put up their hoodies so they looked more sinister. And this one, which I just find obscene, is the BBC's charity Media Action boasting that when they were working in Syria, they were working with the opposition in order to help foment trouble in the country and to overthrow Assad. So here is the BBC now boasting it's been working for a year inside schools to teach young children what the truth is. David, this is just outstanding stuff. The BBC has got to be one of the most dangerous media organisations in the world.
Quite. Yeah, thank you. Well, there's two things clearly need to happen. There needs to be some parents get involved here rapidly, nationally, and they need to be going into their head teachers and saying, we don't want the BBC anywhere near our kids under any circumstances. If they do approach the school, let us know. So that needs propagating rapido. Second thing is we need the licence fee stopping, and this organisation needs to be stopped and disbanded. You know, from my point of view, on the basis they will not, under any circumstances, speak about EU military unification, EU military union, what's happening in PESCO, what the ultimate sort of, you know, topography in Europe is with that, is more than enough to me to say, well, you know, this organisation is frankly morally moribund.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we'll just end the section by coming back to the media man himself, Amol Rajan. He's the BBC media expert. He's the one who's been going into schools. This is from his Twitter page. And the reason I've picked up on this is because he thinks that the fact we have the Chancellor has been using Ministry of Defence planes to shuffle himself around the country, has effectively misused public funds at a time when there's no money. The man who's going to teach children the truth thinks that this is a joke. And I think this sums up the BBC, complete and utter hypocrisy, but putting them next to the minds of young children, immensely dangerous. Have a look at his Twitter page yourself. You can get a feel of this man. The Sun described him as an eating expert because apparently he's very big on food and restaurants. I'm going to say, if you want to find out what's really going on, stick with UK Column. And Alex Thompson wrote an excellent article, Fake News and Impartial Inquiry. I'll bring in Melanie Shaw at this point because, of course, Melanie Shaw has never been covered properly by the BBC. They did an initial report on abuse in Beechwood, and as soon as Melanie and other child abuse survivors started to talk about the real truth of the abuse and the involvement of Westminster and the names of politicians were mentioned, the BBC simply withdrew and no longer reported. So children are certainly not going to be taught about the quality of the politicians running the country.
Well, what about the Telegraph then? Well, the Telegraph thinks that, they're asking what is the Great Repeal Bill? And they believe that the only explanation that I need to read is their article. There's nothing else I need to read on this, Brian. So I did read it. As I go down through this article, there is a question which says, why does the UK need EU laws after voting for Brexit? And they say that it is to ensure what Brexit Secretary David Davis calls a calm and orderly exit. That's it. They go on to say EU laws cover all sorts of things like environmental regulation, workers' rights and financial services. So if they were not transferred, all these regulations would no longer have legal standing in the UK, creating a black hole and causing uncertainty. The bill will give parliaments and assemblies in Westminster, Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff the power to drop or change EU laws it does not want in the future. And of course, that's a complete and utter lie. So what they've done is, this is apparently is the only explanation we will ever need to read, but they don't mention, for example, that whatever deal we get, whenever we get a deal for Brexit, will oblige us to conform to certain laws and regulations in the future that the EU is going to pass in the future, because that's going to be part of the terms and conditions of the new treaty that we sign. So they don't mention that. They just simply say that the bill will give parliaments the ability to drop or change EU laws in the future. So it's, again, censorship by omission, lying by omission. But don't worry, you don't need to go and read anything anywhere else, because this is all you need.
This is the Telegraph's version of Bamboozled by Brexit. The BBC does it in a particularly childish video form. The Telegraph here is doing it in a slightly more sophisticated but equally banal form for adults.
Yes. Okay, so here is the next question of the day, possibly the most important question of the day. Where is Boris? Now, it's a reasonable question. Where is Boris? Because as you read the mainstream media today, there's lots of stuff about Boris. And why is that? Well, because according to Business Insider, for example, Boris is leading a fresh cabinet revolt against Theresa May over Brexit. So if that's what he's up to, I think it's reasonable to know where he is. But we're not told where he is in this article, and that is a standard photograph of him there. It's not from today, so that doesn't give us any clue as to where he is. Well, maybe the Sun knows. Well, the Sun say that lefty activists are trying to silence newspapers they dislike, and they're attacking the very basis of our economy. That's according to Boris. But again, they've got a standard picture of Boris. Nothing. We don't get any clues as to where he is. Maybe Reuters knows. Well, here's what Reuters say. British Foreign Secretary concerned about planned US recognition of Jerusalem. This is because the US is apparently going to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel, and lots of people concerned about, quite rightly. But Boris apparently is concerned about it as well. But again, we've got a stock photograph of Boris there. We still don't get a clue as to where he is. So maybe the BBC knows. Well, apparently Boris Johnson is urging the EU to progress Brexit talks. And we do get a clue from the BBC article, because we have a photograph which is actually from where he is yesterday and today, which we're going to come on to in a second. but they don't tell us where that is in the body of the article or in the tag for the image. Well, okay, maybe we could go to Boris's Twitter feed and find out where he is, but no, there hasn't been anything on Boris's Twitter feed for the last 2 days, so we don't get any clue from Boris. And in fact, in order to get a clue, we have to go to The Guardian, although it's not about where he is. The headline is Boris Johnson expresses frustration with failure to move Brexit talks on. So it's also about Brexit. But in the body of this article, they do say where he is, but only as a by the way sort of statement. So where is Boris? Well, Boris, of course, is at the foreign ministers meeting for NATO in Brussels. We know that because the BBC had a photograph of him there and so on. But we'll just describe what is going on at this foreign ministers meeting. Here they are, the beautiful couple, Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini. This is the NATO foreign ministers meeting. Now it began yesterday with a background briefing and discussions on NATO-EU cooperation, and it ended yesterday with a press conference by the NATO Secretary General and High Representative. That's what you're saying at the moment. So it began with NATO-EU cooperation on defence. It ended with NATO-EU cooperation on defence, and because of that is the main subject of the foreign ministers meeting, and Boris doesn't want to be seen to be there taking part in this, then it seems to get a complete media blackout. It is an incredible situation. Now, this is really important because at this meeting yesterday, they released a new document, and the document is entitled The Implementation of the Joint Declaration signed by the European Council and the European Commission Presidents and the NATO Secretary General, a common set of new proposals. So it's a common set of new proposals on the implementation of the joint declaration, and it covers such a broad range. We'll get to you in a second, David. Hold on one second. Such a broad range of subjects. So they're talking about countering hybrid threats, strategic communications, operational cooperation, including maritime issues, cybersecurity and defense capabilities, exercises. They're going to run a bunch of joint military exercises in 2018. Defence and security capacity planning. EU and NATO staffs will exchange information as appropriate about security situation in eastern and southern partner countries, as well as Iraq and Libya, the Western Balkans, as well as on how to support those countries in relevant international organisations. So it goes on, strengthening dialogue between EU and NATO. There's 4 pages of stuff here, Brian, which is all about the strengthening relationship between the EU and NATO, all about EU military unification and its new relationship to NATO, and Boris doesn't want to be seen to be taking part in that. It's spectacular.
Well, this is just it for Brexit, isn't it? The British public takes the lies and the false media, and behind the scenes they're going rapidly ahead with EU military unification. Isn't this what it's about, David?
Correct. There is only one critical thing to be established and sorted at the moment within this framework of what people are saying is Brexit, and then the only trade deal in town is EU military unification, EU military union. And that is the big deal. It's the must-have. They must have it in order to secure their treasury so they can tax everyone and take ownership of everyone's defence assets. So the PESCO framework, which is what they're doing there in hand in glove with NATO. So obviously EU and NATO are now the same thing. That's very obvious because they're stood next to each other. And the reason Boris is very quiet, he's like some sort of SR-71 stealth minister, radar avoiding, because he doesn't want any of this in the news. He does not want the British people having any idea that their military is about to be
subsumed,
taken into EU military union with absolutely no debate, no mandate, no vote, no scrutiny. Now, there was not an amendment or a subsection on the Brexit ballot paper that kept the military separate. You know, it was, did you want to leave the EU or did you want to remain? So this is an appeal I'm putting out to both camps, so the Remainers as well as the Brexiteers. Were you consulted in any way, shape or form that the military would be treated separately and the industry that goes hand in glove with it? So that's BAE, Babcock, Rolls-Royce, all of it, all the decent stuff. Now let's take it a step further. So the big questions in NATO are obviously the French and British nukes. Now, we've already heard Theresa May talk about, well, our nuclear deterrent, our independent nuclear deterrent, that, by the way, Parliament has just voted to renew, is that...
We're going to lose him, I think.
Can you hear
me?
Yeah,
you're back.
Okay, is that that they've going to think that they can barter seats at the EU military union table with our quality, and the quality is the votes and the bombers, Aldermaston, and the production of our nuclear weapons. And I understand that there are a new series of weapons being produced as we speak, and obviously the production at Barrow-in-Furness. So these are the quality items that are being horse traded at the moment. Ultimately, in these arrangements that are going on. So NATO is the conduit, and the EU are sort of, very cleverly here using NATO as the conduit in order to get French and British nukes. It's as simple as that. And that's what we need to start talking about. Everybody needs to start talking about that and going to your MP. What's going on with this?
Okay, so that was yesterday. And alongside that, just as an aside, we just will mention that the fact that this morning was the NATO Georgia Commission, that NATO allies applaud Georgia's excellent performance on its Euro-Atlantic path and pledge support for fostering reform. So this is more NATO surrounding of Russia. Because Georgia is dying to become a member of NATO. They're pushing forward with suitable reforms, and NATO and the EU at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting applauding the progress that they've made.
It's all becoming obvious, I think, Mike. Let's bring in this man, Dr. Julian Lewis, Chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Now, David, he's been writing he's written a very interesting letter. Let's see whether we can bring this up on screen. This is to Gavin Williams, Secretary of State for Defence. And he's mentioning a lot of things, a lot of questions here. What consultation has taken place with industry as part of the National Security Capability Review? What assessment have you made of the impact of leaving the EU on the UK defence industry? What plans do you have to develop a defence aerospace industrial strategy? What is your reaction to the suggestion that major defence companies are attempting to move to a model where they develop advanced systems but do not manufacture them in the UK? How do you respond to the statement that BAE's restructuring is short-sighted? What are you doing to help secure further exports of Typhoon and Hawk? I'll just bring in the second page here because there's 16 of these points altogether. What steps are being taken to bridge the gap between the Tornado coming out of service and the F-35 coming into operation? What steps have you taken to promote the development of the Advanced Hawk? Will you provide the investment of 120 million suggested by the unions? What steps is the government taking to protect and upgrade the skill base of the UK defence industry? There's some pretty powerful questions, and I was fascinating to suddenly see this letter appear publicly. It's only just come out. Are we actually looking at some of the MPs beginning to see the wood for the trees?
Well, let's hope so, and we need to give them every assistance we can. This is just opening up on Defence Committee's Twitter feed, so it's @Commons Defence. You can also put #DEFCOM. And it'll find it there. There's a conversation opening up on this very issue now on Defence Committee's own Twitter feed. So please join in, everybody. They don't seem to get a lot of coverage and a lot of interaction. And I think it would help everyone greatly if all of us, let's say our end, actually participated constructively and joined in with this. So great work there by Dr. Lewis. Congratulations. My fear is, after watching yesterday's Defence Committee, was that we come to a bit of a watershed during that committee where an ex-senior Royal Marine officer, Robert Fry, basically got to the nub of the matter and saying, where's the policy coming from? Where are the decisions being made? Because this doesn't make any sense at all from a national perspective. And that was the key part, from a national perspective, which of course all of this carrying on isn't. It isn't being conducted from a national perspective. MPs are not participating in any of this function whatsoever. Neither are the ministers. They're just implementing what they're told from elsewhere. So we can see clearly, let's try and be succinct. The UK is cutting through the bone now, as if we have not cut enough. In the process of cutting the military, which is impacted immediately in capability, it also cuts the industry. Now, the compound detrimental future impact from cutting is that it renders our industry more and more inefficient. It takes our industry out of the ability of producing off-the-shelf, timely operational goods that we could sell globally. And this is the consequences. So we are cutting. There are now going to be more cuts, clearly. And what is going on in Europe? What's going on in Europe is they are unifying into military union. And the questions that have to be asked are, what is this relationship between what the UK is doing and what the EU is doing? And are they conjoined in some fashion? Now, my argument that I'm submitting to everyone is there some sort of, as there was with currency union, an exchange rate mechanism. Is this what we're looking at? And this is what needs to happen. So I've got a chain tweet on our Twitter feed. So it's at Strategic Defence, and you'll see the main body of the tweet is right at the top of of the existing Twitter feed now. And there are some, considerable amount of people linked in. All of the Defence Committee members, save one who doesn't have a Twitter feed. If it's possible, can I make an appeal now to everybody out there to share this and retweet it and comment? And let's start interacting with these guys. Anne-Marie Trevelyan said to me in the lobby when I was in Defence Committee, look, we just don't know. We need people to tell us what's going on. And that includes the officers and servicemen and servicewomen and the NCOs. So there's the appeal to everyone. Join in, because, if this is what the MPs are saying, they just don't know what's going on and they want people to come forward and they want the officers to come forward, then let's do that. Now, obviously, we can deal with the other stuff of the letters that we're getting back that are incoherent separately, but we must do this as a first.
David, I'd like to reinforce that point. A couple of people in our chat room have said, we're hearing all this, but what can we actually do? And you are starting to say exactly what people need to do. There is immense power in getting in the faces of MPs and telling them what's going on and asking them what they are going to do about it. MPs, it doesn't matter how arrogant, how brash, how strong they appear in front of the television cameras, behind the scenes, they are utterly terrified of their own constituents turning against them on any matter of policy. So what people need to do is take the information that comes out across UK Column and other alternative media outlets, get that information in front of their MPs and demand to know what they're doing. You've got to spread the information, you've got to talk about it, you've got to wake up Middle England to the fact that this country is being taken apart from the inside. So letter writing, telephone call, emails, tweeting, it has immense power, and that is why, with a little bit of a smile, we've been promoting the UK Column pens, because at the end of the day, the pen is mightier than the sword. You want to stop it, you have to start talking about it, spreading the information and challenging those MPs. And I'll add a bit more at the end of today's news on this subject.
Right, so to reinforce what David's just said, here's the Register, and their headline is, once again, UK doesn't rule out buying F-35A fighter jets. They say the United Kingdom is edging ever closer to buying F-35As instead of the B model needed to fly from the Navy's new aircraft carriers, as a senior officer once again refused to rule out a future F-35A purchase. Lieutenant General Mark Poffley, Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff for Military Capability, told MPs, I don't think we can rule that out, when asked if the British Armed Forces would buy F-35As as well as F-35Bs. Last year, Defence Procurement Minister Harriet Baldwin MP similarly refused to rule out an F-35A purchase. This matters, says the Register, because if the Royal Air Force secures a purchase of the non-navalised F-35A variant, it could leave Britain's future flagships without enough fighter jets to deliver their intended effect. In other words, we are going to be reliant on others to put jets on the deck of the carriers.
Jets which at the moment don't even have a track record of working, Mike. So you buy this American jet and you don't know whether it works. You then go from the B to the A, we're going to say the conventional aircraft, as it were, and in doing so, you wipe out another section of Britain's industry.
David.
Yeah, this was mentioned yesterday in Defence Committee, that they were more or less saying that the carriers would have American aircraft on them or French aircraft, because there wouldn't be any British aircraft. So you can see there the beginnings of what EU military unification actually looks like and how it will work. So, everybody's got to realise that this does affect everyone in the country. And a nation without its military isn't a nation. It's as simple as that. And there's everybody in this country has a share in this. There's not an uncle, a brother, a granddad, a great-granddad that doesn't have a share in this.
David, thank you for that. Well, here's the article that I was referring to when I mentioned Amal Rajan, the BBC's media man. He finds this whole subject here amusing, but what we've got is Philip Hammond consistently using RAF planes to fly around the country or wherever he was going at huge cost, despite there being cheaper options. Then he doesn't want to pay his bill. And what's happening is a spat inside government between the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence, who wants the bill paid. So the BBC finds this amusing. I don't find this amusing at all, because what we're looking at is misuse of public money.
It's not a small amount either. It's £2 billion.
£2 billion.
£2 billion is what's owed, apparently.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for that. So there's the scale of the matter. But the man who is going to teach children the truth, he thinks this is a joke. Well, Breitbart doesn't think it's a joke. Breitbart here saying that it's Hammond is the man who is saying we should get rid of another 28,000 troops, which would bring the British Army down to some 50,000 men. This is exactly the figure that UK Column warned about at least 5 or 6 years ago. It may have been longer now. We need to dig those reports out. But here we are. Chancellor of the Exchequer Philip Hammond told Prime Minister Theresa May that Britain could make do with only 50,000 soldiers at a meeting about defence cuts, it's been claimed. And then there's some comment about the Royal Marines, where at the bottom he said a move, so this is cuts in the Royal Marine and across the British Armed Forces, a move critics suggest is part of a wider effort to run down British forces so they cannot operate independently and are, quote, forced to integrate into an EU-led European army. Well, that's the unified military structure. It isn't just an army, it's a treasury, it's procurement, it's all three forces. And I'll bring in the veterans for Britain here, because we were highly critical a few months ago because we couldn't really see what this organisation was doing. I think they could do more, but they have now started to tweet out. And what are they tweeting here? That it's clear that MPs, the backbenchers, simply have no idea what's going on. Should we give Veterans for Britain a tick in the box? David, are they waking up, or do you think that actually they're too closely in bed with the Conservative Party to tell the truth about Theresa May's EU military unification policy?
Well, that's a superb question. I mean, really, I think, Brian, you're best asking David Banks and Lee Rotherham whether they'll come on the show, and let's do a three-way with them. And I would be delighted to do that. Really what we've got to be saying there is appealing to everyone in the same vein that we have, that we've really got to get behind this. If there isn't the reaction that we need to stop this and say no, and believe you me, ladies and gentlemen, everybody out there watching, there's a huge amount of data analytics employed in analysing the reactions of these sorts of things. And if there isn't the reaction to say no, and they feel the weight of pressure of the people pushing to say no, it will carry on, regardless of whether Major General Julian Thompson says anything or not. This is the fact. If there isn't the weight of support, the gravitas to go to the MPs to get them to realise that this is not acceptable, and they have to do their job as the fiduciary that represents us to the government and the Treasury and say no, no, no. It's that straightforward.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Well, we better end on the subject that, according to the BBC at least, there's been a death threat against our Prime Minister.
Much more than that. Apparently, they were going to blow up the gates of number 10 Downing, the gates on the way up to Downing Street, and then they were going to run in the chaos and stab her.
And presumably the BBC put the evidence for this plot forward, did they, Mike?
It's gone to court, so I'm sure the evidence will come out in due course, but I'm not certain that there's any tangible evidence there.
Okay. Well, we didn't detect a lot of sympathy from members of the public who talked to us about what's happening. So we'll wait with great interest, but I see that the security services are using this for more self-publicity to say how many plots they foiled this year, but they just don't tell the public the facts about those plots. That must be a good industry to be in. We've done really well, so well, we can't tell you what we've done. Now, let's end on a positive note. Many people are now seeing the picture as to what is happening in UK, the deliberate breakdown of society. This is happening as a result of policy. People are making that policy, and it's becoming increasingly easy to see who those people are. But the key things that we need to focus on are common law, constitution, and really the creation and control of money. So if you want to start out researching, suggest you look at those areas, and these are the areas that we need to inform and educate not only our children but adults in the wider population, because these are the issues we need to get to grips with to deal with the criminality in Westminster. And on an extremely positive note, the British Constitution Group has done a huge amount of work over the last 6 months. A new initiative launched just for this purpose, to show people what they can and should be doing to stop this criminality in the British government, and that is the New Chartist movement. And over the coming days we're going to be telling you more about this and what the objective is. As always, of course, everything to be done in a very mature, measured and peaceful way, because that is a key part of overturning the treason which Theresa May and her government are conducting in the UK. David, thank you very much for joining us. That's the end of today's news. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.